All right, so here is the decimals worksheet that we began in class today, and I'm going to start with number 1, and if you don't need number 1, just go ahead and skip through to the next problem. I'm going to zoom in so I have plenty of room to work. So I'm going to begin by putting a box around my variables. I'm going to switch to a smaller box. A box around variables. I'm going to make sure to include my signs that are in front. I'm also going to circle my constants. Then I'm going to draw a line to separate my equal sign. I'm going to put a box and a circle. Okay, so now our first step in solving an equation is to ask ourselves if this equation right here has variables on, or if it has like terms and on the same side of the equal sign. So we see here we have 6.7x and 7.4x, and then we have a 3.3. So these two are like terms, so we can combine them. So with our calculator, we'll go ahead and combine those. And I'll type in exactly as I see it. I'm going to work from left to right. So when I turn my calculator on, I'm going to type a negative 6.7 plus 7.4. And that will give me a 0.7x. And then I'm going to carry down what I have left, 3.32. And then on my right side of the equation, I don't have any like terms. I just have a variable and a constant. So from there, we're going to go to our second step, which is to identify if right here, this part of the equation now has variables on both sides. So I see a variable here and I see a variable here. So those are on each side. So then I'm going to identify my least coefficient and move it to the other side by doing the inverse operation. So since this is a positive 7x, I'm going 0.7x, we're going to, that is smaller than 1, because this is a 1 here. So we're moving our least coefficient and then simplifying. So on the left side, we have 3.32 equals 1 minus 0.7, which is a 0.3x, and we still have 5.6. Okay, so we finished our second step. We moved our variable over, and now we're going to do our third step, which is to identify if we have constants on both sides of the equation. And we have a constant here. A constant is a number without a variable. So we have 3.32 and 5.6. So since we have that, the inside of the foldable will tell us to move to find the constant on the same side of the equal sign as the variable. So right here, this 5.6 is the one that is on the same side as the variable. So we are going to change its sign and create a zero pair on this side. So then in our calculator, we'll do 3.32 minus 5.6, and we're going to get a negative 2.28, and that equals 0.3x. So that is the first step. And then that's our third step. And our last and final step is to divide by our coefficient, which is 0.3. So 0.3 divided by 0.3 is going to be 1, and we'll be left with just an x. And then negative 2.28 divided by 0.3, making sure we have, this is negative 2.28 is our numerator, and our denominator is 0.3. That's going to give us a negative 7.6. And that is our answer. All right. So moving to number 2, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to put a circle around my constants and a box around my variables, a line down my equal sign, a circle for my constants, box for my variables, and you see that I'm including all of my signs that are before the numbers. So on the left side of the equation right here, we don't have any like terms because we have constants and variables. But on the right side right here, we have 7.5 and 7.8 that are like terms. So we're going to combine those on the right side. So in our calculator, 7.5 plus 7.81 equals 15.31. And we still have this minus 7.7a. And then on the right side, we still have 16.81 minus 7.5a. So again, I'm just rewriting it because it makes it a little less messy. So that's our first step, is to combine our like terms, and our second step is to ask ourselves if our equation has variables on both sides. So we have a variable here and we have a variable here. So what it says on the foldable is to move the coefficient that is the least to the other side. So we have two coefficients. We have negative 7.5 and we have negative 7.7, and we're going to find the least, so that is going to be our 7.7. So we're going to perform the opposite operation on both sides. So this becomes our 0, the 7.7 becomes our 0, and then we're left with negative 7.5 plus 7.7 is going to equal 0.2a. But then we still have 16.81 plus the 2.a, and on the right we still have the 15.31. So we're down to our third step, which is to determine if we have constant numbers. So we have a constant number here, 16.81, and we have a constant number here, 15.31. And we're going to then find the constant that's on the same side as the variable and move it to the other side. So that is this 16.81. Since it's a positive, we're going to then subtract 16.81 from both sides. This becomes our 0 pair, and on the left, we're left with 0.2a equals 15.31 minus 16.81. It's going to leave us a negative 1.5. And our last step is to divide by our coefficient, which is 0.2. The coefficient is the number in front of the variable. I don't want to put the a there. So this becomes 1, and we're left with a equals negative 1.5 divided by 0.2, which is a negative 7.5. All right, so we're going to go down to number 3. Again, boxing variables, line, circling constants, boxing variables, and boxing variables. So our first question is to ask if we have like terms on the left and the right, and we see here we have a box and a box, so both variables. So we're going to take the coefficients and combine them without changing any signs. So negative 4.8 plus 3.5 is going to give us a negative 1.3n. And on the right, we have these two boxes. We have 2n and 5.6n, and we're going to combine those. So 2 plus 5.6 will give us 7.6n. And then again, we still have this 3.56. So our next is to see if we have variables on both sides. So we have a variable here, negative 1.3n, and we have a 7.6n. So on the inside of the foldable, it will tell us to move the least coefficient to the other side. So that's our 1.3n plus 1.3n. So this will become 0. So we're left with a 0 on this side. And then on this side, we're left with 3.56, and then 7.6 plus 1.3 is a positive 8.9n. So this is where you may be a little tricked out. So again, remember that 0 is on this left side, and we have, we're down to our third step, which is to identify if we have constant numbers on both sides. So this one's pretty easy. This 3.56 is easy to tell it's a constant because there's no variable next to it. But we also have to recognize that 0 is also a constant number. So with that being said, our answer is yes, and then we are supposed to move the constant that's on the same side as the variable to the other side by changing its sign. So this is a positive 3.56 minus 3.56. So we're going to subtract 3.56 from both sides. This will become 0, and we'll be left on the left side with negative 3.56 equals 8.9n. And our last step is to divide by our coefficient of 8.9 on both sides. This will become 1, and we'll be left with n on that side, and negative 3.56 divided by 8.9, and we're going to be left with a negative 0.4. All right, number 4. Back with our circling constants and boxing variables, line at the equal sign, circle our constants, box our variables. I'm going to do that better. So our first question is to ask if we have like terms on the left, which we do not, or like terms on the right, we do not. So we get to go down to our second question, which is to identify if we have variables on both sides. So right here, we have a variable on the left, we have an x, and then we have a 1.6x. So since we have variables on both sides, we're going to find our least coefficient and move it to the other side. So I'm going to just write a 1 there just to remind us. So since 1 is smaller than 1.6, we're going to subtract 1x from both sides. This will become 0, and over here will become a 0.6x. But we can't forget that we have a 1 on the left side, so we have 1 equals negative 2.84 plus 0.6x. So from here, we now are down to our third question asking about constant numbers. So we have a constant 1 and we have a constant negative 2.84. And so we're going to identify the constant that's on the same side as the variable, and that's pretty obvious. We have it right here, the negative 2.84. So we're going to add 2.84 to both sides. So this will become 0, and we'll be left on the right side with 3.84 equals 0.6x. And then easiest step is to divide by our coefficient, which is 0.6. 0.6 divided by 0.6 is 1, and we're left with x equals, and then on the left we have 3.84 divided by 0.6, and that gives us a 6.4. Alrighty, so going down to number 5, we have a box, our variables, circle our constants, draw a line, circle constants, and box our variables. So again, we're going to first ask ourselves if it has any like terms on the left side, which we do not, or the right, and we do not. So we're going to go down to our second one to identify if we have variables on both sides. So we do have variables right here. We have 4.9a and we have negative 1.5a. So what we have to do is find our least coefficient and move it to the other side by changing its sign. So we're going to add 1.5a. If you're curious why I'm moving this one, is because negative is smaller than the 4.9, so we're going to add 1.5 to each side. This will become our 0, and 4.9 plus 1.5 is going to be 6.4a. Oh, I'm so sorry. Look, I forgot to put my a. So then we're going to carry down what's left. So we have plus 3.69 equals 5.61. So right here we have our third question, which is to identify if we have constant numbers on both sides, which we do. We have 3.69 and 5.61. So we're going to move the constant that's on the same side as the variable by changing its sign. So we're going to then subtract 3.69 from both sides. So this will become 0. And we'll be left on the left side with 6.4a equals, and then again, here's 5.61 minus 3.69, 1.92. And our last step is to divide by our coefficient of 6.4 to get our final answer. So we'll be left with a equals, and then 1.92 divided by 6.4 is 0.3. All right, going to number 6. We're going to box variables, circle constants, line at the equal sign, circle, box. So again, we see that we don't have any like terms on the left and we do not have any like terms on the right. So we get to determine if we have variables on both sides, and we have a variable here and we have a variable right here. So that will take us to moving our least coefficient. So we're going to add our 3.9r to both sides because there's a negative right here. We have our negative, so we have to make our zero pair. So add 3.9r to both sides. This will become our 0. So 5.9 plus 3.9 is 9.8. R plus 5.65 equals 2.71. So we're down to our third step, which is to identify if we have constant numbers. So we have a positive 5.65 and we have a positive 2.71. So from there, we're going to find the constant that's on the same side as the variable, and we're going to move that one by changing its sign. So we're going to subtract 5.65 from both sides. That will become 0. And we'll be left on the left with 9.8r equals 2.71 minus 5.65. We have a negative 2.94. And our last step is to divide by 9.8. And this will become 1. So we'll be left with r equals, and then negative 2.94 divided by 9.8, which is a negative 0.3. All right, so now we're going to go to number 7. So we have variable, constant, constant, variable. So our first question is to ask if we have any like terms on both sides. So right here we have a box and a circle, so those can't be combined, and we have a circle and a box, so those can't be combined. And then we're going to look if we have variables on both sides. So we have a v over here and we have a v over here. So that's going to take us to moving our least coefficient. So right here we have a 1, so we need to determine whether 1 or 1.4 is smaller. So our 1 is smaller, so we're going to subtract 1v from each side. And on the left, we'll be left with a positive 0.7 equals 1.94. And then over here, 1.4 minus 1 is going to be a positive 0.4v. And we're to our third step and seeing if we have constant numbers on both sides. So we do. We have a 1.94 and we have a 0.7. So we're going to move the constant that's on the same side as the variable. So this will become a 0. And then we'll be left with 0.7 minus 1.94. So this is a negative 1.24 equals our positive 0.4v. And our last step is to divide by our coefficient. And negative 1.24 divided by 0.4 is a negative 3.1 equals our v. All right, going to number 8. So here we have circling constants, boxing variables, line at our equal sign, box variable, circle constant, and circle constant. All right, so on the left side, we are going to see that there are no like terms. We have a constant and a variable, so those can't be combined. And right here we have only one variable, but we do have two constants. So we're going to have to combine those without changing any signs. So 4.8 minus 0.9. So we're going to go 3.9 over here, and then bring down what's left. 2.26n plus 3.9, and then 3.69 plus 0.16n. So now we have to determine if we have variables on both sides, and from the beginning we knew that we had variables on both sides. So we have variable here and variable here. So we're going to find our least coefficient and move it. So that is our 0.016. So I'm going to subtract 0.16n from both sides. So that will become 0. So 2.26 minus 0.16 will leave us with a 2.1n. And again, we just carry down what's left, plus 3.9. And on the left side, we have 3.69. So now we're going to determine whether we have constants on both sides. So we have 3.9 without a variable and 3.69 without a variable. So we're going to move the constant that's on the same side as the variable. So this will become 0, and 3.69 minus 3.9 is going to be a negative 0.21 equals 2.1n. And our last step is to divide by our coefficient of 2.1, and we'll be left with n equals negative 0.21 divided by 2.1. We're going to be left with a negative 0.1. All right, we're going to go to number 9. So here we have boxing our variables, boxing a variable, circling a constant, line at the equal sign, circling a constant, and boxing a variable. So on the left side, we have, on the left side right here, we have two like terms. So we're going to combine those. 6.4 p plus 0.7 is going to give us a 7.1 p. And then we're going to carry down what's left, 14.56. And on the right side, we don't have any like terms, so this will just get rewritten like this. Okay, down to our next question is if we have variables on both sides, and we do. We have 7.1p and we have minus 4.7p. So we're going to move our least coefficient. So this might be a little tricky. Again, remembering that we have to include our negative sign right here that I'm laser pointing. So we're going to add the 4.7 p to both sides. This will become 0, and 7.1 plus 4.7 will give us 11.8 p, and then carry down what's left, plus 14.56 equals 3.94. Now we go to our third step, which is to see if we have constants on both sides. So if this is a constant without a variable, 14.56 and 3.94, we will move the constant that's on the same side as the variable by changing its sign. So that becomes our zero pair on the right side, 3.94 minus 14.56. We have a negative 10.62 equals 11.8 p. And our last step is to divide by our coefficient of 11.8. We have p equals negative 10.62 divided by 11.8 will give us a negative 0.9.